Under the gray skies of northern France in the year 1914, a strange silence fell across the trenches. It was Christmas Eve, and in the midst of one of the deadliest conflicts humanity had ever unleashed, an extraordinary event unfolded, an unofficial moment of peace, now remembered as the Christmas Truce. This is the story not merely of a day when guns fell silent, but of the fragile humanity that flickered between explosions and blood. A rare glimpse of compassion amid an industrial war machine determined to grind it to dust. The First World War was only months old by December. Both sides believed the conflict would be over by Christmas, yet by then it had already consumed hundreds of thousands of lives. The Western Front stretched from the North Sea to the Swiss border, a scar of mud, barbed wire, and death that ran for nearly 500 miles. In this frozen wasteland, men huddled in trenches, enduring the biting cold, the stench of rot, the ceaseless rattle of machine guns, and the fear that every sunrise could be their last. The Christmas truce was not planned. It was not a strategic pause nor an order from any command. It was born from exhaustion, curiosity, and the human need for connection. It was spontaneous, fragile, and utterly against every order given to those who fought. But that very spontaneity is what makes it so unforgettable. To understand what happened that Christmas, we must first imagine what life was like for the men who took part. A British private might have woken to the sound of distant shell fire on the horizon, his breath turning to mist, his boots caked in mud. On the other side, a young German soldier, barely 20, might have been writing a letter home, his hands trembling not from fear, but from cold. The trenches were miserable. Rats scurried through, feeding on the dead. Water collected on the floor until it froze into a thin sheet of ice, and the smell, that unimaginable mixture of stagnant mud, gunpowder, and decay, soaked into their clothes and skin. As December deepened, both armies found themselves sunk into a state of weary stalemate. The great offensives of the year had failed. The bodies of the fallen lay between the trenches in the no-man's land, and the soldiers waited for directives that never seemed to bring progress. On the 23rd of December, rumors spread that the Germans were decorating small Christmas trees along their trench lines. Some accounts speak of lighted candles perched precariously on sandbags, silhouetted against the dark. It was at once absurd and beautiful, a delicate gesture of normality amidst chaos. On the evening of the 24th, the singing began. The British, huddled in their lines, could hear faint melodies drifting across the no-man's land. The tune was unfamiliar to some, but the message was unmistakable. From the German side came the slow, haunting rise of Stille Nacht, that timeless carol about peace and the holy night. One by one, heads lifted above parapets. Some responded with their own carols, the first Noel, O Come All Ye Faithful. Across the mud and wire, the two enemies found themselves joined not by strategy or ideology, but by song. The voices blended, uncertain but sincere, forming a kind of fragile bridge of humanity suspended between the lines. Lieutenant Charles Brewer of the Rifle Brigade later wrote that it was a most extraordinary sight, seeing those Christmas trees with candles on them burning brightly in the middle of nowhere. Another soldier recalled hearing the German soldiers shout out greetings, voices carrying across the frozen air, English soldier, Merry Christmas!" At first, suspicion ruled. Could it be a trick? Was this the enemy trying to lure them out? But soon laughter followed, tentative jokes tossed over the parapets. Then came the first brave souls, men climbing slowly from their trenches, unarmed, hands raised. Across the way, others mirrored the movement. They met in the broken wasteland that hours ago had been a death zone. It is impossible to say exactly where it began. Some historians point to the sector near Ypres, others along the lines near Ploegsteert Wood. The truce seemed to ripple like a wave, starting in isolated pockets and spreading through the evening and into Christmas Day. Along several miles of the front, German and British soldiers shook hands. They exchanged gifts: cigarettes, chocolate, whiskey, tins of bully beef, even buttons and badges. One man gave his opponent a photograph of his wife. A German juggler performed tricks. A Scotsman pulled out his bagpipes and played as laughter echoed through the wintry fields. They buried their dead. In some sectors, the brief lull allowed burial parties to retrieve bodies lying forgotten between lines for weeks. Priests from both armies stood together, holding makeshift services among the crosses. The snow soaked into the men's boots as they prayed side by side. There were even reports of soccer matches. One of the most famous, though perhaps exaggerated over time, describes British soldiers kicking a frozen tin can across the dirt as their counterparts joined in, the laughter echoing off the cratered earth. A German soldier later wrote in a letter home, "The English brought a ball from the trench, and a real football match got underway. How marvelously wonderful, yet how strange. Whether a full match took place or not, the idea became symbolic, a vision of sport triumphing briefly over slaughter. For a few hours there was humanity in no man's land. Officers looked on, some astonished, others disapproving but unwilling to intervene. There was camaraderie, photographs, the sound of voices mingling in peace. Then, inevitably, came the creeping realization that this could not last. The generals fumed when word reached headquarters. The war machine depended on discipline, on the dehumanization of the enemy, and such moments of connection were dangerous. Orders came down swiftly. No fraternization, no mercy. The truce had to end. By the afternoon of Christmas Day, the first artillery shells shattered the fragile quiet. The men retreated reluctantly to their trenches, exchanging one final wave or handshake before disappearing again behind the guns. By the next morning, the killing resumed. The official reports made little mention of it, and in some sectors it never happened at all. Places where bitterness or mistrust ran too deep, where officers prevented it, or where too many lay dead for the living to consider peace. But the story of the Christmas truce spread through letters sent home, through diaries and oral retellings. It captured something uncanny, a glimmer of what might have been if humanity's instincts for compassion had overcome the machinery of war. It was not the last time soldiers would fraternize, but never again on such a scale. The following Christmas, both sides took precautions to ensure there would be no repeat. Shelling intensified, and propaganda hardened the lines between human beings turned enemies. In the years that followed, the war grew more brutal, introducing poison gas, tanks, aerial bombings, and industrial slaughter that made the early months look almost naive by comparison. Yet, that one day, the stillness of Christmas 1914 remained, something pure and inexplicable. The reasons it happened are complex. Some historians argue it arose from mutual exhaustion. Others see it as an inevitable expression of shared culture. For many soldiers on both sides were Christian Europeans, raised on the same carols, the same understanding of Christmas as a time of peace and goodwill. A few, more cynically, suggest it was opportunism. Men using the day to retrieve supplies, tend to the wounded, or simply take a break. But beyond motives, something profound occurred. Individuals who had been told to hate, to kill, to see the other as faceless, suddenly found themselves face to face and recognized their reflection. The letters written home after the truce are among the most poignant testaments we have to its authenticity. A young British soldier named Frederick Heath wrote, "There was not an atom of hate on either side that day." Another, John Ferguson, recalled, "It was just like the interval between the rounds of a friendly boxing match. For some it was exhilarating, for others deeply confusing." One German corporal named Adolf Hitler, stationed elsewhere on the front, condemned the truce entirely, calling it treason against the fatherland. In that contrast of reactions lies the heart of what made the truce both miraculous and impossible. The truce holds a mirror to the paradox of war, the capacity for humanity within inhuman conditions. Those soldiers, for a few hours, glimpsed each other not as enemies but as men bound by the same misery, singing the same songs, hoping for the same impossible end. And when they went back to their trenches, when the guns roared again and the smoke enveloped the landscape, they carried the memory of that peace like a ghost. Some said it made killing harder afterward. Others said it renewed their belief in a cause, insisting they could not let such horror continue. But for all, it left a mark. In the years after the war, veterans would often speak of that Christmas with an almost dreamlike nostalgia, as if, for that single night, sanity had briefly returned to an insane world. Poems were written, plays performed, films later made, each reimagining the truce as something symbolic, almost mythical. But behind the myth lies the raw truth of individuals acting on instinct, defying their orders, and recognizing, without permission, the humanity that war sought to erase. Still, The Christmas truce also reminds us how fragile that recognition is. Wars since have rarely allowed such things to happen. The industrialization of conflict, the intensification of ideological divides, and the technologies of surveillance and command have made spontaneous fraternization almost unthinkable. Modern warfare leaves little room for direct human contact between enemies. Drones, missiles, and long-range artillery have replaced the intimate brutality of trenches. Yet that intimacy, the shared misery of proximity, was precisely what made the truce possible. They lived close enough to hear the same songs through the cold night, close enough to smell each other's cooking, close enough to share the same rain. The distance between the living and the dead, between enemy and ally, was measured in yards. That closeness, paradoxically, gave birth to compassion. When historians reconstruct the events of that night, they find small contradictions. In one sector, a handshake. In another, a football match. In yet another, only a brief pause in gunfire or shouted greetings that never became meetings. There was no universal truce. It was a mosaic, 100 small sparkles of peace glowing along the dark front. Yet collectively, these fragments form a story more powerful than any single battle. Because in a war defined by machinery, where men were mere components of a system, the Christmas truce was a revolt of the individual soul. The irony, of course, is that such rare peace occurred in one of history's bloodiest wars. Over the next 4 years, millions more would perish. The ground that was once silent on Christmas Eve 1914 would be churned again by shellfire and screams. The same fields where soldiers shook hands would later swallow them whole. And yet, historians keep returning to that event because it whispers a question that defies easy answers. If such peace was possible, even for one night, what stopped it from lasting? Part of the answer lies in how societies sustain war. A single soldier can feel compassion, but armies require obedience. For the generals and politicians, fraternization threatened the entire structure of warfare. The truce had to be branded as dangerous sentimentality. Orders went out threatening court-martial for any repetition. Training intensified, and men were reminded that pity had no place among patriots. Propaganda portrayed the enemy as monsters, urging soldiers not to forget their fallen comrades. The machinery of hate resumed its rhythm. And yet, despite the official condemnation, the memory endured. In Britain, newspapers published curious reports of unofficial truces and friendly meetings, though often censored or softened for readers at home. In Germany, letters seized by censors confirmed the same thing. Families read of their sons shaking hands with their foes. For a brief time, the story spread faster than the governments could suppress it. In a war built on nationalism, the Christmas truce became a gentle scandal of shared humanity. Over the decades, artists and writers reimagined the truce as a symbol of hope. It became the subject of novels, songs, and films, each trying to grasp what it meant when soldiers, taught to hate, chose to love their neighbor instead. The historical record is patchy, but the emotional clarity remains. The simplicity of candles glowing on a trench edge, voices singing Silent Night in 2 languages that intertwined beneath the same stars, that is what survives in memory. Even today, memorials stand on the old front lines near Ypres, where descendants of both British and German soldiers gathered to remember that extraordinary night. There, among the poppies, they sometimes reenact a football match. Not to romanticize the horror, but to remind the living that peace, however momentary, is always within human reach. Standing on that scarred ground, one can still feel the chill of 1914. Still imagine the quiet murmur of voices across the frost. Still sense that impossible, ethereal feeling of shared existence under the same sky. The truce has also stirred philosophical debate. Some see it as proof that war cannot destroy empathy entirely. Others argue it shows the futility of individual goodness against vast systems of violence. Yet maybe both are true. It is easier to destroy bridges than to build them, but those few built by song and candlelight that Christmas have never truly collapsed. The proof is in how often we return to them, In history books, in classrooms, in remembrance ceremonies, in every moment when we imagine that sudden hush after months of shelling and realize that, for a brief moment, the human spirit won. To visualize that moment is to step into a scene almost cinematic in its stillness. Imagine the dark outline of the trenches stretching into infinity, the faint shimmer of the stars caught in the wire, the murmur of voices and distant bells from ruined churches. Then, a sound rises. A melody carried by breath that turns to visible mist in the cold. Across the divide, another voice answers, hesitant but in harmony. The men climb out, their boots crunching on the frozen earth, rifles slung uselessly at their sides. They meet where the ground is cratered and torn. They exchange names, though the wind steals many of them away. Someone opens a bottle of schnapps. Someone else produces a tin of biscuits. Someone laughs at the absurdity of it all. And for that single, trembling instant, the world seems healed. As the night wears on, conversation shifts awkwardly. A few men talk about home, their villages, their wives, their newborns they've never seen. Others compare uniforms or trade bits of language. A German soldier sketches a cartoon in the mud. A British soldier claps in appreciation. Both are tired. Both know this cannot last. The officers glance at their watches, uneasy about what dawn will bring. Yet none can bring themselves to give the order to break the spell. At last, in the pale morning light, the first crack of rifle fire echoes again. Not at close range, but distant, like the sound of reality returning. The men shake hands one final time. "Good luck," a German says in halting English, and "to you," the reply comes. They turn, each to his trench, each carrying back the memory of what peace looked like. When the command comes to fire again, some hesitate. Some aim above the enemy heads. But soon the war reclaims them all. The rhythm of destruction resumes. The strange thing is how gentle the memory remained among those who lived it. Even decades later, when veterans gathered in old age, they spoke of that truce with warmth rather than bitterness. It had been, after all, their only experience of normality amidst the deluge. It showed them that even in the darkest winters, humanity does not vanish entirely. It waits, buried under orders and fear, until some song or gesture brings it to the surface again. In a broader sense, the Christmas truce also foretold the 20th century's moral paradox, the coexistence of extraordinary cruelty and occasional, fragile compassion. It reminds us that even when nations rage and ideologies clash, individual hearts may still recognize each other. The truce did not change the course of the war. It did not save lives in the long run, or shorten the conflict by even a day, but it changed how we remember that war. It gave us a story that refuses to be drowned in blood, a story of candles burning through the fog, of soldiers who chose, for a few shining hours, to stop being soldiers. Some historians have questioned whether the story has been overly romanticized. Were there really football matches? Were the songs sung by thousands or only by a few? Does it matter? Myths often tell deeper truths than numbers can. The Christmas truce endures not because of the precise details, but because of what it reveals about the human yearning for peace, even among those forced to fight. The very uncertainty of its facts mirrors the instability of its reality. It was never fully real to those who lived it either. They woke from it as if from a dream, and perhaps that is why the story continues to grip us. In an age where distances separate enemies by oceans and technology renders killing impersonal, the idea of men climbing out of trenches to meet face to face feels almost unthinkable. They risked court-martial, even death, to share that moment. They did not do it because anyone told them to, but because something within them, something ancient and defiant, insisted that killing on Christmas night was unendurable. Whenever humanity has seemed at its worst, the story resurfaces. During later wars, soldiers would recall it wistfully, sometimes attempting small truces of their own. During the Second World War, British and German pilots occasionally saluted each other mid-air before vanishing into cloud. During the Cold War, the tale of 1914 was used as a lesson in hope that even the most entrenched conflicts contain, buried deep, the possibility of understanding. But the most profound legacy of the Christmas truce lies not in remembrance, but in the question it leaves behind. What if peace is always that close, a few words, a few steps, a shared song away, yet we choose not to cross that invisible line? Those men did cross it, if only once. And even though history swept their gesture aside beneath the thunder of shells, the echo remains. As the years pass and the last veterans fade from memory, their letters and diaries remain as whispers from another world. One wrote, "If we had decided then and there to stop fighting, perhaps peace would have come, but nobody knew how." That single sentence encapsulates both the tragedy and beauty of the event. They glimpsed peace, but lacked the power to keep it. Yet that glimpse was enough to alter how we see them, not just as soldiers, but as men. And so, as we revisit that night through film, story, or imagination, we find a strange comfort. Amid horror, human beings remembered how to be human. In the cold silence of the front, amid broken bodies and hopelessness, someone began to sing, and others listened. It started with a song. That is how peace often begins, not with treaties, but with one voice daring to rise against the noise. The Christmas Truce of 1914 remains one of history's most inexplicable wonders. It did not stop the war, but it offered a fleeting glimpse of what could have been, a living parable of humanity's dual nature. The same species that builds machines of destruction can also share a meal with its enemies beneath the stars. The same hands that pull triggers can also give gifts. We are capable of both, and perhaps forever bound to the tension between them. When the last guns of the Great War fell silent in 1918, and peace was proclaimed officially, many who had lived through the truce felt that true peace had already visited them years before, on that quiet winter's night when men sang across the dark. For them, the ceremony of armistice was grand, but fleeting. The memory of laughter in no man's land remained luminous and untainted. Long after the borders shifted and monuments rose, that memory endured as something sacred, a fragment of light that war could not extinguish. Even today, standing in those frost-bitten fields, one might imagine hearing echoes of Stille Nacht drifting faintly on the wind. A reminder that beneath the noise of history, beneath its cruelty and confusion, the possibility of peace still lies waiting, as it always has, in the human heart.